The universe screamed. Across 1,000,000 worlds, psychers collapsed in unison, their minds shattered by an arrival that defied comprehension. On Cadia's ruins, the few remaining sentries felt their souls recoil. In the depths of Hive Primus, astropaths clawed at their eyes until blood ran between their fingers. Even the black ships, warded by the Emperor's own blessing, shuddered as their precious cargo writhed in absolute terror. The Astronomicon, that holy light which had guided humanity through the darkness for 10 millennia, flickered. Navigator houses across the galaxy felt it first. Ancient bloodlines, their third eyes open to the warp's currents, saw the impossible, a star falling upward, a light that cast shadows into the immaterium itself. Lady Quintessa of House Nostromo, her skull wreathed in augmetic sensors, spoke her final words before madness claimed her. He comes not from the warp. He comes through it. On Terra, in the deepest vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, servitors froze mid-task. Their simple machine spirits, blessed with the inability to truly comprehend, could only register error codes as reality bent around them. Tech priests chanted in binary, their prayers becoming increasingly desperate as ancient cogitators began displaying impossible calculations, equations that described the mathematics of despair. And from the golden throne came sounds that none had heard in living memory. The Emperor stirred. Deep within the throne chamber, beyond layers of security that could withstand the full fury of a chaos invasion, something unprecedented occurred. The corpse god's fingers, those withered digits that had remained motionless for centuries, twitched. His sunken chest, sustained only by the life force of 1,000 psychers daily, rose and fell with what might have been called breathing. Captain General Valoris of the Adeptus Custodes felt his heart stop. In 10,000 years of vigil, through demon incursions and the darkest days of the heresy, the Emperor had remained perfectly still. Now, for just a moment, those hollow sockets seemed to turn toward the palace walls, toward something approaching Terra. The custodian reached for his guardian spear, though against what threat he could not say. Through the void between stars, immune to the absence of reality itself, walked a figure in a perfectly tailored suit. Each step found purchase on nothingness, his polished shoes clicking against vacuum as if it were marble. He adjusted his tie with casual precision, his movement unhurried despite traveling faster than light itself. Behind him the warp boiled. Demons of all four gods fled in terror, their essence unable to comprehend what passed through their realm. Even the mightiest bloodthirsters, beings that had slaughtered Space Marine chapters and laid waste to systems, cowered in the presence of this walking contradiction. He was order in chaos, silence in the endless screaming, and most terrifying of all, he was calm. As he neared Terra's system, Imperial Navy fleets detected the impossible readings. Void shields that could deflect planet-killer weapons simply stopped. Not destroyed, not overwhelmed. They ceased to function in his presence, their machine spirits surrendering without resistance. Admiral Collect of the Battlefleet Solar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Emperor's Judgment, watching his instruments fail one by one. "Report!" He barked, but his officers could only stare at blank screens. "Sir," whispered Navigator Corellius, her voice strained with effort, "something approaches Terra. But it's not. It doesn't belong to this universe. It's like watching a hole in reality with legs." The Admiral gripped his command throne. "All ships, prepare for." But as the figure passed their formation, the crew of every vessel turned to their viewports and saw him. A man in a business suit, walking through space with a pleasant expression, his hands clasped behind his back as if enjoying a morning stroll. He waved at them. Every crew member waved back, though none could later explain why. As he reached Terra's atmosphere, the very air parted before him. He descended through clouds that turned black at his passing, through winds that fell still rather than dare touch his immaculate clothing. Below, the sprawling hive cities of the throne world registered his approach on every sensor, every auspex, every blessed detection grid the Mechanicus had ever devised. All readings were the same, nothing detected. In the depths of the Imperial Palace, Inquisitor Marcus Thorne reviewed reports with growing unease. He was a lean man, scarred by decades of fighting humanity's enemies, his Ordo Malleus training having prepared him for demon incursions, heretical cults, and chaos corruption. But the reports flooding his desk defied categorization. "Psyker casualties across 17 sectors," he muttered, scanning the data slate. "No observable cause. No warp storms, no demon manifestations, no cultist activity. They just broke. His servoskull Veritas hovered nearby, its red optical sensors dim. Even the simple machines seemed subdued, its usual chittering replaced by mechanical whimpers. And these readings from the outer system, Thorne continued. Fleet reports of a single figure, human, walking through vacuum. But every pic capture comes out blank, every vid recording shows only static. He set down the data slate and rubbed his temples. 40 years of service, and he'd never encountered anything like this. The closest comparison was the accounts of the Emperor's own presence during the Great Crusade, that sense of impossible grandeur that tech couldn't capture, couldn't quantify. But this felt different. Where the Emperor's presence was described as overwhelming light, this was more like an absence that somehow smiled. The figure touched down in the courtyard of the Imperial Palace, with the gentle precision of a feather. His feet met marble with a soft click, and it took a moment to dust off his jacket, though no speck of debris could be found upon it. Around him, the palace guards, elite soldiers who had faced Chaos Marines and Demon Princes without flinching, stood frozen. Not by fear exactly, but by a strange compulsion to watch, to witness, to be present for what was clearly a moment of cosmic significance. He straightened his cufflinks and smiled at the assembled forces. It was a pleasant expression, the kind a favorite uncle might wear at a family gathering. Warm, understanding, infinitely patient. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying perfectly in the thin air, somehow audible to every guard despite speaking barely above a whisper. "I believe I'm expected." The massive gates of the inner sanctum, barriers that had never opened for any being save the custodes themselves, groaned open without a sound of protest. The ancient machine spirits that governed them simply complied. As he walked through corridors that had witnessed the footsteps of Primarchs and the Emperor himself, reality seemed to adjust around him. Servoskulls fell silent. Automated defenses powered down. Even the air recyclers seemed to purr with contentment at his passage. And deep within the palace, Inquisitor Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. But change, he was beginning to realize, might not be the right word. Something was arriving that would reveal what had always been true. The High Lords of Terra had assembled an emergency session within the Senatorum Imperialis, that vast chamber where the fate of humanity had been decided for millennia. 12 of the most powerful individuals in the galaxy sat around the obsidian table, their faces grim beneath the Emperor's golden gaze, his image immortalized in stained glass above their seats. Lord Commander Militant Thaddeus Corvanus spoke first, his augmetic jaw clicking as he accessed tactical data streams. Fleet movements across 30 sectors report the same phenomenon. A single figure, humanoid, moving through space unprotected. Our ships, weapons refuse to lock on. Impossible, grunted Fabricator General Udia Raskian, his voice a mechanical rasp through Vox grills. Nothing organic can survive the void. The machine spirits must be experiencing widespread malfunction. Master of the Administratum Violetta Rhine, her pale features sharp as a blade, leaned forward. The malfunction, if we may call it that, extends to our entire bureaucratic apparatus. Servitors have ceased functioning across 12 departments. Not broken, ceased. As if waiting. Lord Inquisitor Hector Rex, his Terminator armor humming with barely contained power, slammed a gauntleted fist on the table. This reeks of chaos corruption. I recommend immediate. The chamber's vast doors, each weighing several tons and sealed by adamantine locks blessed by the Emperor himself, swung open as silently as curtains in a breeze. The figure that entered wore a charcoal suit of perfect cut, his shoes polished to mirror brightness. He was handsome in an unremarkable way, the sort of face one might pass on any civilized world and forget within moments. His hair was combed with mathematical precision. His smile was that of a man arriving precisely on time for an appointment. He walked to the head of the table, where no chair had ever stood, where protocol demanded only the Emperor's tarot be placed during the most sacred deliberations. The floor itself seemed to reshape, a throne of black marble rising to accommodate him as naturally as if it had always been there. "Gentlemen, ladies." His voice was pleasant, cultured, with an accent that seemed familiar to each listener, though none could place its origin. "Thank you for gathering. I do so appreciate efficiency." Lord Commander Corvanus reached for his bolt pistol, but his hand stopped halfway. Not from fear, from a strange certainty that such weapons were simply inappropriate, like bringing a sword to a chess match. "Who are you?" demanded Rhine, though her voice lacked its usual authority. "By what right do you—" "Ah, rights." The figure smiled wider, steepling his fingers. "Such an interesting concept. I am called many names across many worlds. But here, in this place, among these people, you may call me Lucifer. Lucifer Morningstar." The name hung in the air like incense, though none present recognized it. Fabricator General Raskian's cogitators ran rapid searches through the Imperium's vast databases, finding nothing. "I come," Lucifer continued, "from a place you might call adjacent. A universe much like yours, though older. More refined. There, I serve a particular function. I am the one who whispers in the ears of those who would be kings. I am the voice that tells a man his chains are crowns. I am the teacher who shows mortals that their suffering has meaning, divine meaning." He stood, walking slowly around the table, his presence somehow making the vast chamber feel intimate. "In my universe, I represent submission. Not the crude domination of your chaos gods. Oh, I know of them, those crude children playing with emotions like toys, but willing submission. Subjugation that souls choose. Pain that mortals embrace as purpose." Lord Inquisitor Rex found his voice. "You speak of heresy, of corruption." "Do I?" Lucifer paused beside the Inquisitor's chair, leaning down as if sharing a confidence. "Tell me, good Hector, may I call you Hector? When a citizen reports his neighbor for thought crime, is that corruption? When a hive worker labors 18-hour shifts producing ammunition for wars he'll never see, is that heresy? When a mother sends her children to die in the guard and thanks the emperor for the privilege, is that submission?" Rex's scarred face paled. That is duty. Service to the emperor." "Precisely." Lucifer straightened, clapping slowly. "You've built the most exquisite system of willing suffering in any universe I've encountered. 40,000 years of humanity choosing to kneel. 40,000 years of mortals embracing their agony as sacred obligation. I am here, dear Hector, because this universe has become the greatest feast of despair ever created." Master Rin leaned forward despite herself. "You speak of feeding on suffering. You claim to be some manner of demon?" "Demon?" Lucifer laughed, a sound like silver bells. "My dear administrator, demons are crude things. Emotion given form, hunger made manifest. I am something far more elegant. I am the meaning behind the suffering, the purpose that transforms agony into worship." He gestured to the stained glass above them, where the Emperor's image blazed in golden glory. "Your species fascinates me above all others. The orcs fight because it is their nature. Can you blame a wolf for hunting? The Tau expand because they believe in their greater good, admirable if naive. The Eldar cling to their dying traditions, understandable given their circumstances." His smile faded, replaced by something that might have been disappointment. "But humanity is unique. Eons ago, in both our universes, your species was offered salvation. A figure appeared. You knew him as Christ. We knew him as... Well, names have power, don't they? He offered love, forgiveness, freedom from the chains of sin and suffering." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. Several of the High Lords shivered involuntarily. And what did humanity do? Lucifer's voice hardened, though his pleasant expression never wavered. "They killed him. In my universe they moved on, found new chains to forge. But here you did something magnificent. You took that sacrifice, that ultimate act of love, and you perverted it. You made it the foundation for the most oppressive regime in galactic history." He walked to the great windows, gazing out at the sprawling hive cities below. Your emperor, let's be honest about what he is, sits on a throne built from the bones of psychers. Daily, 1,000 souls are fed to him so that he might continue to cast a light across the void. And what do your people call this? Divine mercy. Sacred duty. The ultimate expression of love. Lord Commander Corvinus found his voice. The Emperor protects. Without him, humanity might have found actual salvation. Lucifer turned back to the table, his eyes seeming to catch light that wasn't there. But that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to destroy your beautiful system. I'm here to perfect it. What do you mean? Whispered Rin. I mean that this universe has created the perfect engine of despair, and you don't even realize it. Every prayer to your corpse god is a soul choosing slavery over freedom. Every guardsman who dies screaming the Emperor's name is a human being embracing meaningless death as holy purpose. Every citizen who reports his neighbor, every priest who preaches suffering as virtue, every administrator who processes the documents that doom millions, all of them willing participants in their own damnation. His smile returned, brilliant and terrible. You see, the other chaos gods, bless their simple hearts, they offer corruption, transformation, change. But I offer validation. I tell mortals that their chains are beautiful, that their suffering has meaning, that their oppression is, in fact, the highest form of love. The silence stretched until Fabricator General Raskian's Vox grill crackled. You claim to represent order? The highest order. The order that comes when souls police themselves. When citizens choose to suffer because they believe it's righteous. When entire worlds willingly march into death because they've been convinced it's glorious. Lucifer leaned on the table, his presence filling the room like incense. Your Imperium has spent 40 millennia creating the perfect conditions for my work. And the most beautiful part? You've done it all in the name of good. Master Rhine's hands trembled as she reached for her data slate. You're saying the Imperium itself is the greatest achievement in the history of evil? Oh, my dear, it absolutely is. But don't mistake me for some crude chaos worshipper. I don't want to destroy your system. I want to sanctify it. I want every act of oppression to be seen as holy. Every bureaucratic cruelty to be understood as love. Every pointless death to be celebrated as salvation. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow reached every corner of the vast chamber. I want your people to know that their emperor is God. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Actually. A God who demands suffering. A God who hungers for sacrifice. A God whose love is expressed through the systematic brutalization of his chosen people. The High Lord sat in stunned silence, each grappling with the implications. This wasn't corruption in any form they understood. This was validation, sanctification of every dark choice the Imperium had ever made. But enough philosophy, Lucifer said, straightening his tie. I believe we have visitors. Reality tore. The chamber filled with impossible geometries as the warp bled through. Demonic howls echoed from every surface as the combined forces of chaos poured into real space. Greater demons of all four gods materialized in wreaths of fire and shadow, their forms too terrible for mortal minds to fully process. A bloodthirster, its wings spanning the chamber's width, raised an axe that could cleave mountains. A lord of change twisted reality around its talons, its ever-shifting forms cycling through 1,000 possible deaths. A keeper of secrets moved with predatory grace, its perfect beauty hiding appetites beyond imagination. And a great unclean one brought gifts of plague and despair, its bloated form weeping pus and laughter in equal measure. Behind them came legions, bloodletters and horrors, daemonettes and plague-bearers, the endless armies of the warp given form and fury. The High Lords drew weapons, activated force fields, called upon every protection their rank could provide. But as the demons charged, they stopped mid-stride, their forms flickering like broken hollow displays. Lucifer hadn't moved. He stood at the head of the table, hands clasped behind his back, watching the frozen army with mild interest. "Oh, my dear children," he said, his voice carrying a note of parental disappointment. "Did you really think this would work?" The bloodthirster roared, swinging its axe with force that could shatter reality itself. The weapon passed through Lucifer as if he were made of morning mist. "You see," he continued conversationally, "you operate on emotion, passion, the raw, crude energies of souls in torment. But I operate on consent, on choice, on the willing embrace of damnation." The demons pressed their attack, reality bending under the assault of impossible geometries and non-Euclidean angles. Warp fire that could unmake atoms washed over Lucifer like a gentle breeze. Psychic screams that had shattered planets became whispers in his presence. The Lord of Change spoke in a voice like breaking glass. "You do not belong here, stranger. This realm is ours by right of conquest." "Conquest?" Lucifer laughed. "My dear Tzeentch, may I call you Tzeentch? You've misunderstood the nature of this universe entirely. You haven't conquered anything. You're parasites, feeding on the waste products of a system far more elegant than anything you could devise." The demon's form shifted through a dozen configurations, each more terrible than the last. "We are change incarnate. We are evolution itself." "You're amateur hour," Lucifer replied pleasantly. "Look at what you've accomplished in 40,000 years. A handful of daemon worlds. Some cultists. The occasional black crusade that ultimately fails. You're playing with toys while the real work happens in broad daylight." He gestured to the windows, where Terra sprawled in all its terrible glory. "Every day, trillions of human souls wake up and choose to perpetuate a system that grinds them into dust. They don't do it because you've corrupted them. They do it because they believe it's right. They do it because they've been convinced their suffering is sacred." The great unclean one's laughter shook the chamber. "You speak of suffering as if you understand it, little godling. We are suffering made manifest." "Are you?" Lucifer's smile never wavered. "Because when a human soul experiences your gifts, your plagues, your despair, your corruption, what happens? They fight it. They resist. They maintain hope that they can be cleansed. But when they kneel before the golden throne and offer their children as sacrifices, when they work themselves to death in hive factories and call it worship, when they report their own families for thought crime and sleep peacefully afterward, that's not corruption, dear Nurgle. That's art." The air around them began to vibrate, reality itself groaning under the pressure of conflicting forces. The demons pressed closer, their forms becoming more solid, more real, as if the sheer force of their will could overcome Lucifer's strange immunity. But then space cracked. Not tore, cracked, like glass under pressure. Through the fissures came something that made the greater daemons step back in recognition and fear. Khorne himself emerged into reality. Not a bloodthirster in his service. Not a demon prince empowered by his rage. The blood god himself, a figure of such primordial fury that his presence caused the chamber's adamantine walls to weep red tears. He stood taller than the greatest titans, his armor forged from the concepts of war itself. In his hands he carried not weapons, but the idea of violence made manifest. When he spoke, his voice was the sound of every battle that had ever been fought, every scream of rage that had ever been uttered, every drop of blood that had ever been spilled in anger. "You do not belong in this reality, stranger." The High Lords cowered, their enhanced physiologies unable to process the sheer presence of a chaos god in the material realm. Several collapsed, their minds fragmenting under the weight of absolute fury. Lucifer, however, applauded. "Now this is more like it. The genuine article. Not sent through intermediaries, not filtered through the warp's crude metaphors. The actual god of battle himself." He bowed slightly. "I'm honored, truly. Though I must say, your timing could use work." Khorne raised his weapons, concepts that had no names because language itself fled from them. The air became thick with the promise of violence, reality bending under the weight of infinite rage. "I care nothing for your words. I care nothing for your purpose. You threaten the order of things. You will be destroyed." "The order of things?" Lucifer's expression became genuinely puzzled. "My dear Khorne, I am the order of things. Or rather, I'm the force that makes order possible. Tell me, where does your power come from? The blood god's response was to attack. What followed could not be properly described in human language. It was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a collision between fundamental forces of reality itself. Khorne had brought the fury of 1,000,000,000 battles, the rage of every warrior who had ever drawn blade in anger. His blows could shatter planets. His roars could silence stars. Lucifer met each attack with perfect calm. Where Khorne's weapons struck, they passed through without resistance. Where his fury pressed, it found no purchase. The Morning Star stood unmoved, not through superior power, but through a kind of conceptual immunity, as if rage itself simply didn't apply to him. You see, Lucifer said, as reality warped around them, his voice carrying clearly through the storm of violence, your power comes from choice. Every berserker who gives in to fury chooses to embrace rage. Every warrior who strikes down his comrades in bloodthirst chooses to serve you. Even your most devoted followers maintain some fragment of will. They could, theoretically, choose to stop. Khorne's assault intensified. The chamber began to dissolve, its walls unable to contain the conflict. Through the growing chaos, the High Lords watched in terror as their understanding of power itself was challenged. But I, Lucifer continued, dodging blows that moved faster than thought, I don't deal in momentary choices. I deal in systems. In structures that make certain choices inevitable. When a human child is raised from birth to believe that suffering is holy, when an entire culture is built around the sanctification of pain, when the very language itself has been shaped to make oppression sound like love, that's not corruption, my wrathful friend. That's engineering. The blood god's response was to manifest his full power in the material realm. The laws of physics became suggestions. Gravity reversed, time flowed backward, and the concept of violence itself took shape and form. Terra shook. Across the throne world, citizens looked up to see the sky fracturing like broken glass. In the depths of the palace, even the golden throne groaned under the pressure. The emperor's psychic presence flickered as reality itself struggled to contain the battle. But gradually, impossibly, the violence began to lessen. Not because Khorne grew weak. His fury was infinite, eternal. But because something about Lucifer's presence made violence seem unnecessary. Crude. Like using a hammer to perform surgery. This is what you don't understand, Lucifer said, his suit still immaculate, despite the cosmic forces tearing at reality around him. You offer transformation through rage. I offer validation through structure. You corrupt individuals. I sanctify systems. Your power depends on souls choosing to embrace fury, but my power comes from souls never realizing they have a choice at all. Khorne's attacks grew more desperate, more savage. He called upon every warrior's death, every battle's fury, every drop of blood spilled in his name across the galaxy. The assault would have annihilated solar systems, rendered entire sectors into screaming void. Lucifer caught one of the impossible weapons in his bare hand. And that, he said softly, his grip somehow stopping the blade that could cut through the fabric of reality itself, is why you cannot touch me. Because I don't corrupt your followers, dear Khorne. I perfect them. He gestured toward Terra beyond the dissolving walls. Every Imperial Guard regiment that marches into hopeless battle screaming your name thinks they're serving the Emperor. Every Space Marine who loses himself to the Black Rage believes he's fighting for humanity. Every citizen who reports his neighbor for violent tendencies is convinced he's promoting peace. The weapon in his grip began to dim. They choose to serve you, yes, but they do it because the system I've helped create tells them that violence in service of the Imperium is good. They embrace rage because they've been taught it's holy. They spill blood because they believe it's righteous. Khorne's massive form wavered, his perfect fury meeting something it could not overcome, not through superior strength, but through a kind of conceptual completeness that made opposition meaningless. You see, my friend, I don't steal your worshippers. I validate them. I make their service to you feel like service to good. I make their rage feel like righteousness. I make their violence feel like virtue. And in doing so, I make their damnation complete. The blood god's roar shook the palace to its foundations, but the sound carried something that had never touched his voice before, uncertainty. because he was beginning to understand what stood before him. "You're not another god of chaos," Corny said, his voice losing some of its impossible resonance. "You're something else entirely." "I'm the god of willing damnation," Lucifer replied. "The deity of chains that souls forge for themselves. The divine presence that transforms oppression into worship, suffering into sacrament, and despair into devotion." He released the weapon, which clattered to the floor as ordinary metal. Around them, the other greater daemons watched in growing horror as their understanding of power itself was challenged. "And this universe," Lucifer continued, spreading his arms to encompass all of Terra, all of the Imperium, all of humanity's 40 millennia of willing subjugation, "is my masterpiece." The battle was over. Not because either side had been defeated, but because both sides had finally understood what they were truly facing. Corny and his fellow gods began to fade back into the warp, not in retreat, but in respect. They had encountered something that existed on a level they had never imagined, not a competitor, but a foundation. The bedrock upon which their own crude corruptions were built. As the last of the demons vanished, Lucifer straightened his tie and turned back to the High Lords, who had witnessed the impossible, a battle between gods that ended not in victory or defeat, but in mutual recognition. "Now then," he said pleasantly, "where were we?" "Ah, yes, I believe we were discussing the future of the Imperium." The chamber was quiet, except for the sound of reality slowly healing itself around them. Outside, Terra's citizens continued their daily routines, unaware that the fundamental nature of their existence had just been clarified. "You're going to help us?" whispered Master Ryan. "Help you?" Lucifer laughed. "My dear administrator, I'm going to do something far better. I'm going to show you how beautiful your system already is. How perfect. How absolutely, magnificently efficient at producing the precise kind of suffering that feeds. Well, let's just say it feeds purposes beyond your current understanding." He walked to the great window, gazing out at the sprawling hive cities with something that might have been paternal pride. "Every form you've ever filled out, every regulation you've ever enforced, every citizen you've ever processed through your magnificent bureaucratic machine, every single act of administrative oppression carried out in the name of the Emperor's will." His smile widened. "Pure poetry. The willing submission of souls who believe their chains are halos." The High Lords exchanged glances, beginning to understand that they had not been conquered. They had been recruited. 6 months after the Morning Star's arrival, the Imperium ran more smoothly than it had in millennia. The changes were subtle at first, so subtle that most citizens didn't recognize them as changes at all. Administrative processes that had once taken decades now completed in months. Bureaucratic appeals that had previously vanished into the labyrinthine depths of the administratum now received responses. Negative responses, mostly, but responses nonetheless. Citizens began to take pride in the efficiency of their oppression. In the depths of administrative complex Tertius 7, senior scribe Matthias Kroll reviewed the morning's work quota with something approaching joy. Before the improvements, his department had processed perhaps 50 requisition denials per day. Now they managed nearly 300, and each denial was a small masterpiece of bureaucratic poetry. Request for additional rations for Hive Sector 7 Alpha denied. Reason, gluttony, is the enemy of devotion. The Emperor provides all that his servants require for righteous service. Additional sustenance would corrupt the purity of their sacrifice. Kroll read his own words and felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Not only had he denied the request, standard procedure, but he had done so in a way that made the denial itself feel like a gift. The citizens would read this and thank him for preserving their spiritual purity through enforced starvation. Beside him, junior scribe Helena Voss processed work assignment transfers with similar artistry. Transfer request from Manufactorum 12 to Manufactorum 15 denied. Reason: the Emperor has placed each soul precisely where they may serve him best. To question this placement is to question his divine wisdom. Worker will remain at current assignment to demonstrate perfect faith through obedience. She paused, considering her work. Helena, add a note recommending the worker for additional devotional hours. Such spiritual doubt requires correction. Yes, senior scribe, Voss replied, making the notation. Should I also recommend increased work quotas to help strengthen their dedication? An excellent suggestion. Kroll smiled. See that it's implemented immediately. Neither scribe questioned the source of their newfound eloquence. The words simply felt right, as if they were channeling some higher purpose. The daily grind of denying basic human needs had transformed into sacred work, the systematic cultivation of suffering in service to divine will. 3 levels up, in the Administrative Oversight Division, Director Cornelius Haddix reviewed the monthly reports with growing satisfaction. Productivity was up across all sectors. Compliance rates had reached levels not seen since the glory days of the Great Crusade. Most importantly, citizen satisfaction with imperial governance had improved dramatically. That last point would have puzzled observers from the previous regime. Living conditions hadn't improved. If anything, they had grown marginally worse as quotas increased and rations decreased. But citizens no longer complained with the same bitter desperation. Instead, their letters expressed gratitude for the opportunity to demonstrate perfect loyalty through sacrifice. A typical citizen response from Hive Worker Delta 7729 read, "Honored administrators, I thank you for denying my request for medical treatment for my daughter. Your wisdom shows me that her suffering serves the Emperor's will. Through her pain, our family draws closer to his divine love. May we prove worthy of such sacred trust." Haddix reread the letter several times. Not because it was unusual, such responses had become standard, but because each reading filled him with a profound sense of accomplishment. This was what governance should be: citizens who understood that their hardship was holy, that their deprivation was divine, that their submission was sacrament. He dictated a response. Citizen Delta 7729 demonstrates exemplary faith. Recommend his daughter for inclusion in the Sacred Suffering Program. Her condition shall serve as inspiration to others seeking to prove their devotion through willing sacrifice. As the months passed, these changes rippled outward through every level of imperial society. In the ecclesiarchy, sermons began to emphasize the joy of suffering rather than merely its necessity. Cardinal Vex Torquemada, speaking before a congregation of millions in the Basilica Imperialis, proclaimed, "Blessed are those who hunger, for their emptiness makes room for the Emperor's love. Blessed are those who labor unto death, for their exhaustion proves their devotion. Blessed are those who watch their children die in his service, for they offer the most precious sacrifice." The congregation wept with gratitude. Not the bitter tears of the oppressed, but the joyful tears of the blessed. They had been chosen to demonstrate perfect love through perfect submission. In the depths of the palace, Lucifer watched these developments through reports that crossed his desk with increasing frequency. He had established himself not as a conqueror, but as a consultant, the friendly advisor who helped the Imperium realize its full potential. His office was modest by High Lord standards, a simple chamber furnished with elegant restraint. The only decoration was a single painting, a beautiful landscape of rolling hills under a perfect blue sky. Visitors often remarked on its peaceful quality, though none could explain why looking at it made them feel slightly nauseous. "The Astra Militarum reforms are proceeding beautifully," reported General Mordak Kryn, reviewing data slates with barely contained enthusiasm. "Recruitment is up 400% since we began emphasizing the honor of dying for the Emperor rather than the mere necessity." "And how are the families responding?" Lucifer asked, making notes in a leather-bound journal. "With unprecedented cooperation," Kryn replied. "Mothers are volunteering their children for the most dangerous assignments. Fathers are requesting their sons be sent to the deadliest battlefields. They understand now that a quick death in the guard is a waste. We need soldiers who will suffer beautifully before they die." "Excellent. And the Space Marine chapters?" "Some resistance among the older members, but the younger Marines are adapting well. Brother Captain Thaddeus of the Imperial Fist sent this report. The new emphasis on embracing the pain of gene seed implantation has transformed our recruitment process. Aspirants who previously begged for relief now thank us for every agony. They understand that their suffering sanctifies them for service." Lucifer smiled. "Perfect. What about the tech priests?" General Kryn consulted another slate. "Fascinating developments there. Magos Gamma Rho 7 has begun preaching that the pain of cybernetic implantation is more important than the enhancement itself. Quote, "The flesh is weak not because it lacks strength, but because it lacks the capacity for infinite suffering. Each augmetic replacement allows us to experience new forms of holy agony. The Omnisio's true gift is not knowledge, but the ability to suffer more perfectly. And the citizens are accepting this? More than accepting, they're embracing it. We're seeing unprecedented voluntary reporting of thought crime, with citizens denouncing themselves for imagined heresies. The guilt processing centers can't keep up with demand. Lucifer set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. Magnificent. Truly magnificent. In 6 months, you've accomplished what the Chaos Gods couldn't manage in 40,000 years. Sir, you've made oppression feel like privilege. You've transformed systematic cruelty into sacred duty. You've convinced an entire species that their chains are halos. He stood, walking to the window that looked out over Terra's sprawling masses. Every morning, trillions of souls wake up and choose to perpetuate their own damnation, and they do it with gratitude. General Kryn shifted uncomfortably. Something about the Morning Star's praise felt simultaneously wonderful and deeply wrong. Sir, if I may ask, what exactly are we achieving here? Lucifer turned, his smile radiant. We're proving that the Emperor truly is God, General. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Actually, a God who demands suffering, a God who feeds on sacrifice, a God whose love is expressed through the systematic brutalization of his chosen people. And that's good? It's honest. Lucifer's expression became almost sympathetic. For 40,000 years, your species has knelt before a corpse and called it worship. You've fed him the souls of your children and called it mercy. You've built the most oppressive regime in galactic history and called it protection. I'm not changing anything, General. I'm simply helping you understand what you've already chosen. The General nodded slowly, though something deep in his enhanced physiology screamed warnings. The Emperor protects, he said automatically. Yes, he does, Lucifer agreed. He protects you from the terrible burden of free will. He protects you from the crushing weight of individual responsibility. He protects you from the awful possibility that your suffering might be meaningless. His smile widened. Under his divine guidance, every act of cruelty becomes holy. Every bureaucratic torture becomes sacrament. Every meaningless death becomes sacrifice. As General Kryn left, his mind buzzing with new ideas for improving recruitment efficiency, Lucifer returned to his desk. The reports continued to arrive, each more encouraging than the last. From the Schola Progenium, children now compete for the privilege of flagellation during morning prayers. We're seeing remarkable improvements in compliance and academic performance. From the Administratum, citizens have begun thanking us for property confiscations and arbitrary arrests. They understand now that such hardships strengthen their devotion. From the Arbites, crime rates have plummeted as citizens voluntarily confess to infractions they haven't even committed. The joy they express during sentencing is unprecedented. From the Imperial Navy, crew morale has never been higher. Sailors fight for the honor of working in the most dangerous sections of the ship. Several have requested transfer to vessels scheduled for suicide missions. But the report that pleased him most came from an unexpected source. From Inquisitor Marcus Thorne Ordo Malleus, I must report a significant decrease in chaos cult activity across 17 sectors. Citizens who previously might have turned to heretical worship now find complete fulfillment in their service to the Imperium. Paradoxically, their absolute devotion to the Emperor appears to be spiritually satisfying in ways that concern me. Request permission to investigate this phenomenon further. Lucifer chuckled as he filed the report. Dear Marcus, so close to understanding, yet so far from accepting the truth. The Inquisitor would require special attention. He pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment and began composing a memorandum. Asterisk, to all administrative departments, effective immediately, implement the following efficiency improvements to demonstrate our perfect love for the Emperor. All citizen requests shall be processed with mathematical precision, precisely calculated to cause the maximum spiritual benefit through systematic denial. Work quotas shall be adjusted to ensure each citizen experiences the exact amount of suffering necessary for spiritual growth. No more, no less. Food rations shall be distributed according to divine mathematics, each citizen receiving precisely the minimum required to maintain their capacity for sacred labor. Housing assignments shall be calculated to ensure optimal spiritual development through appropriate hardship. Medical care shall be administered with surgical precision, healing only those whose continued suffering serves the Emperor's will. All appeals, requests, and petitions shall be processed through the sacred filter, ensuring that each citizen's interaction with imperial authority increases their devotion through appropriate disappointment. Remember, we are not merely administrators. We are priests in the Church of Willing Submission, shepherds guiding souls toward the perfect embrace of sacred suffering. Each form we process, each denial we issue, each quota we impose, all of it is prayer. All of it is worship. All of it is love. He signed it with a flourish and handed it to his aide, a cheerful young woman who had volunteered for the position after her previous job in sanitation management. She had specifically requested the most demanding, thankless work available, explaining that she wanted to prove her devotion through perfect submission to bureaucratic tedium. Distribute this immediately, he instructed. Priority Alpha Omega, and add a note that implementation should begin with joy. Yes, sir, she replied, her eyes bright with the fervor of the truly devoted. Will there be anything else? Actually, yes. Lucifer pulled out another sheet of parchment. Draft a commendation for scribe Matthias Kroll in Complex Tertius 7. His work in the Ration Denial Department has been exemplary. Recommend him for promotion to Senior Director of Spiritual Correction through Administrative Excellence. As his aide hurried away, Lucifer returned to his window. Below, Terra pulsed with the rhythms of perfectly ordered suffering. In the hive cities, workers sang hymns of gratitude as they labored 18-hour shifts. In the administrative complexes, scribes wept with joy as they processed denials that would doom entire families. In the ecclesiarchy temples, citizens competed for the privilege of demonstrating their faith through ever greater acts of self-sacrifice. It was beautiful. More beautiful than anything he had achieved in his home universe, where souls had to be tempted toward damnation. Here they ran toward it with open arms, convinced that their suffering was sacred, their oppression divine, their chains the very bonds of love itself. A chime indicated another visitor. Enter, he called. Cardinal Vex Torquemada entered, his augmetic limbs clicking against the marble floor. The ancient ecclesiarch's face bore the serene expression of a man who had finally found his true calling. My lord, the cardinal began, the faithful are requesting guidance. They wish to know how they might suffer more perfectly for the emperor's glory. And what do you recommend, your eminence? The sacred program of voluntary deprivation. Citizens would compete for the honor of experiencing the emperor's love through systematic removal of life's comforts. Food, shelter, family, hope, all surrendered willingly to demonstrate perfect faith. Lucifer nodded approvingly. Excellent. But I would add one modification, make it a lottery. Citizens must enter their names for the chance to be chosen for enhanced suffering. Make them compete for the privilege. The cardinal's eyes lit up. Brilliant! They will see selection for deprivation as a divine blessing, a sign of the emperor's special favor. Precisely. And those not chosen will experience the unique agony of feeling unworthy of sufficient suffering, a delicious paradox that will drive them to ever greater displays of devotion. As the cardinal left to implement this new program, Lucifer reflected on the elegant mathematics of despair he was orchestrating. Every soul pushed deeper into submission, every spirit broken more completely, every hope crushed more thoroughly, all of it done with the victim's grateful consent. The Chaos Gods had never understood the true artistry possible in corruption. They offered transformation, change, the promise that suffering could be transcended through embrace of darker powers. How crude. How limited. But Lucifer offered something infinitely more sophisticated, the assurance that suffering was already transcendent, that oppression was already divine, that the existing system was already perfect. No transformation necessary, no corruption required. Just understanding. Understanding that chains could be halos if you held them at the right angle. Understanding that slavery could be freedom if you defined the terms correctly. Understanding that hell could be heaven if you simply acknowledged that pain was love, that cruelty was kindness, that damnation was salvation. He picked up his pen and began drafting the next phase of improvements. The Imperium was functioning beautifully, but there was always room for refinement. After all, they had eternity to perfect the system. and perfection, Lucifer had learned, was a process best savored slowly. Inquisitor Marcus Thorn stood in the ruins of what had once been a Chaos Cult's shrine, his augmetic scanner sweeping over symbols that should have radiated corruptive energy. Instead, they registered as inert, not cleansed or purified, but simply abandoned, empty, as if whatever dark purpose they had once served was no longer necessary. "This is the 7th site this month," he muttered to his aide, interrogator Cassia Vex. 7 cults, all disbanded voluntarily. Members returning to normal, imperial service with unprecedented enthusiasm. Cassia consulted her data slate, her scarred face reflecting months of similarly confounding investigations. "The pattern is consistent across 17 sectors, my lord. Former heretics, cultists, even documented demon worshippers, all spontaneously abandoning their heresies to embrace orthodox imperial doctrine." Thorn knelt beside what had been the shrine's altar, running his gauntleted fingers over carved runes that now seemed as lifeless as decoration. "In 40 years of service, I've never seen anything like this. Chaos corruption doesn't just fade. It has to be burned out, cut away, purged with bolt and flame. Perhaps the Emperor's light has simply grown stronger?" Cassia suggested, though her tone carried doubt. "Perhaps." Thorn stood, his joints protesting after decades of augmetic enhancement. "But there's something else. These former cultists, they're not just returning to baseline imperial faith. They're demonstrating levels of devotion that border on the fanatical." He activated his Vox recorder, adding another entry to what had become the strangest case file of his career. Investigation log, day 847. Subject: spontaneous abandonment of heretical practices across multiple sectors. Latest findings: former Slanesh cultist Maria Collect, previously devoted to excess and sensation, now works 19-hour shifts in Manufactorum 7 producing ammunition. When questioned, she expressed gratitude for the opportunity to demonstrate devotion through exhaustion. Quote, "The Prince of Pleasure offered me false satisfaction. Only through perfect submission to imperial authority do I find true fulfillment." End quote. He paused the recording, troubled by something he couldn't quite articulate. The woman's words had been technically orthodox, even praiseworthy. So why did they leave him feeling cold? "My lord," Cassia interrupted his thoughts, "there's something else. I've been analyzing the psychological profiles of these reformed heretics. They all share certain characteristics. Such as? Complete absence of doubt. Absolute certainty in the righteousness of imperial doctrine. And most strangely, they seem to derive genuine pleasure from deprivation and hardship." Thorn's enhanced memory recalled similar reports filtering up through inquisitorial channels. Citizens volunteering for the most dangerous work assignments. Families donating their children to the guard with expressions of joy. Entire hive sectors competing for the honor of reduced rations. "Cassia, bring up the theological assessment I requested from Cardinal Voss." His aide activated a holo display, projecting the Cardinal's lengthy report into the air between them. "His Eminence concludes that we are witnessing an unprecedented spiritual awakening. Quote, the faithful have discovered the true joy of submission. They understand now that suffering is not a burden to be endured, but a gift to be embraced. Their happiness in hardship reflects the Emperor's perfect love." End quote. Thorn studied the projection, his unease growing. And the administratum reports? Similar themes. Citizen compliance at all-time highs. Productivity exceeding all projections. Most significantly, voluntary reporting of thought crime has increased by 700%. Voluntary? Citizens denouncing themselves for imagined heresies. Families reporting each other for insufficiently devout behavior. Children informing on parents for private expressions of doubt. Cassia's voice carried a note of uncertainty. The confession processing centers are overwhelmed. Thorn deactivated the holo display and walked to the shrine's broken window, gazing out at the hive city beyond. In the distance, he could see crowds gathering around public notice boards, citizens eagerly reading new regulations, new quotas, new restrictions, their faces bright with anticipation rather than resignation. "There's someone I need to speak with," he said finally. "Someone who might have insights into unusual spiritual phenomena. My lord? Prepare a secure Vox channel to the Ordo Malleus archives. I need to speak with Lexicanum Hadrian Vex. If anyone understands the theological implications of what we're seeing, it's him. 3 hours later, in the secure communications chamber of his personal transport, Thorn faced the flickering hologram of one of the Ordo's most learned scholars. Lexicanum Hadrian Vex was ancient even by Astartes standards, his cracked features bearing the weight of centuries spent studying humanity's darkest secrets. Marcus, the old scholar's voice crackled through the Vox link. Your report makes for disturbing reading. Disturbing? Brother Lexicanum, we're witnessing the greatest victory over chaos corruption in imperial history. Citizens abandoning heresy in droves, embracing orthodox doctrine with unprecedented fervor. How is this disturbing? Vex was quiet for a long moment, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused. Tell me, Marcus, in all your years fighting chaos, what have you learned about the nature of corruption? That it spreads through temptation. False promises of power, pleasure, change. It appeals to weakness, to desire, to the mortal craving for something beyond the mundane. And how does one resist such corruption? Thorn frowned at the question. Through faith. Through understanding that imperial doctrine provides all that a soul truly needs. Through acceptance of one's place in the emperor's plan. Precisely. Chaos offers transformation, we offer stability. Chaos promises change, we provide order. Chaos corrupts by making the forbidden seem appealing. We protect by making duty seem sufficient. Vex leaned forward, his ancient features grave. But what if someone offered to make duty seem more than sufficient? What if they made submission feel like ecstasy? What if they transformed acceptance into addiction? The implications hit Thorn like a blow to the chest. You're suggesting that what we're seeing isn't victory over corruption. It's a more sophisticated form of corruption itself. I'm suggesting that you investigate the source of these improvements. Who has been advising the High Lords on matters of spiritual reform? Who has been developing these new efficiency protocols that somehow make citizens grateful for their oppression? Thorn felt his world shift around him. The Morning Star. He arrived 8 months ago, positioned himself as a consultant to imperial governance. Every report I've read credits him with the recent optimizations. And what do you know about this Morning Star? Very little. He appeared during a massive warp disturbance, claimed to represent some form of order. The High Lords accepted his counsel, and since then, Thorn trailed off, the pattern suddenly becoming clear. Since then, the Imperium has become more efficient at producing suffering, and the citizens have become more grateful for their chains. Vex's voice carried the weight of terrible certainty. Marcus, I believe you may be dealing with something beyond our usual understanding of corruption. Something that doesn't seek to change the Imperium, but to perfect it. What do you recommend? Investigation. Careful, thorough investigation. But Marcus, the ancient scholar's voice carried a note of warning. If I'm correct about what you're facing, traditional methods may be insufficient. You're not dealing with heretics who have turned away from imperial truth. You may be dealing with something that has made imperial truth more true than it should be. After the transmission ended, Thorn sat in the darkness of his chamber, considering the Lexicanum's words. More true than it should be. What did that mean? He activated his personal cogitator and began pulling files on the Morning Star, cross-referencing them with reports from across the Imperium. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Administrative Efficiency Report, Subsector Gamma. Implementation of new processing protocols has reduced citizen complaint resolution time from never to immediately. Citizens now express gratitude for denials of basic services. Ecclesiarchy Behavioral Assessment, Hive Primus. Congregation participation in voluntary suffering programs exceeds all projections. Waiting lists for self-flagellation have grown to over 10,000 citizens. Astra Militarum Recruitment Analysis, Sector Command Tertius. Recruitment rates have increased 400% since implementation of enhanced spiritual guidance programs. Families compete for the honor of providing children for the most dangerous assignments. Industrial Output Summary, Forge World Metallica. Worker productivity at all-time highs despite reduced rations and increased quotas. Workers report unprecedented satisfaction with their spiritual development through labor. Each report painted the same picture, an imperium that had become more imperial than ever before. More efficient at oppression, more systematic in its cruelty, more successful at convincing its citizens that their suffering was sacred. And at the center of it all, a figure in a perfectly tailored suit, offering advice on how to make the existing system run more smoothly. Thorn stood and walked to his armor stand, beginning the ritual of donning his inquisitorial battleplate. Whatever he was facing, it was time to confront it directly, but first, he needed to understand one more thing. He activated his personal vox and sent a coded message to his most trusted contact in the Adeptus Custodes. Request immediate audience regarding spiritual advisors to High Lords. Priority, absolute. Authentication, Thorn Sigma 77 Alpha. Message ends. If anyone could provide insight into the true nature of the Morning Star, it would be the Emperor's own guardians. The response came within minutes. Audience granted. Custodian General Valoris will meet you in the Chamber of Vigilance. Come alone. Come armed. Come prepared for truths that may challenge your understanding of service itself. As his transport lifted off toward the Imperial Palace, Thorn found himself praying to the Emperor for guidance. But for the first time in his long career, he wondered if his prayers were reaching the right recipient. Because if the lexiconum was correct, if the Morning Star represented some form of perfected corruption that didn't change the system but made it more itself, then every prayer offered to the God Emperor might be exactly what the enemy wanted. The thought was heretical, blasphemous, unthinkable, and increasingly, Thorn feared it might also be true. The Chamber of Vigilance lay in the deepest vaults of the Imperial Palace, a space known to fewer than a dozen individuals in the entire Imperium. Here, where the walls were carved from single blocks of adamantine and inscribed with words that had been blessed by the Emperor himself, the most terrible secrets were discussed in whispers. Custodian General Valoris stood with his back to the door as Thorn entered, his massive form encased in the golden armor that marked him as one of the 10,000. When he turned, Thorn was struck by something he had never before seen in a custodian's eyes: uncertainty. "Inquisitor," Valoris said, his voice resonating from his helm's vox grills, "you come seeking truth about the one who calls himself Morning Star." "I do, Custodian General. My investigation suggests that he may represent a form of corruption beyond our standard understanding." Valoris was silent for a long moment, his enhanced senses scanning the chamber for any hint of surveillance. Satisfied, he reached up and disengaged his helm seals, revealing a face that bore the weight of 10 millennia of service. "What I am about to tell you," he said quietly, "must never leave this chamber. The knowledge I share could shatter the Imperium's faith, and faith, however misguided, is all that holds us together now." Thorn felt his enhanced heart skip a beat. "Custodian General? The Emperor is aware of the Morning Star's presence. Has been since the moment he arrived." Valoris walked to the chamber's center, where a single chair sat beneath the shaft of light. "For 8 months I have watched our Lord and Master struggle with this knowledge." "Struggle how?" "The being that sits upon the golden throne is not the Emperor as he once was, Inquisitor. 40,000 years of psychic strain, of consuming 1,000 souls daily, of maintaining the Astronomicon while his body slowly dies, it has changed him. Perhaps corrupted him. Certainly. Focused him." Thorn felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "Are you saying the Emperor has been compromised?" "I am saying that the difference between divine will and cosmic horror may be thinner than we have ever imagined." Valoris sat heavily in the chair, looking suddenly ancient despite his enhanced physiology. "The being on the throne has become something that requires suffering. Not metaphorically. Literally. The pain of humanity feeds him, sustains him, gives him the strength to maintain his grip on reality. But that's what the Morning Star suggested. That the Emperor is God, and gods require sacrifice. Yes." Valoris's voice was barely a whisper. "And therein lies our terrible dilemma. Because the Morning Star isn't lying, Inquisitor. He is telling the absolute truth." Thorn staggered, reaching out to steady himself against the wall. "That's impossible. The Emperor protects humanity. He sacrifices himself for our sake." "Does he?" Valoris stood, beginning to pace the small chamber. "Consider what the Imperium has become under his guidance. 10,000 years of systematic oppression. Billions of souls fed into wars that serve no purpose beyond generating more suffering. Entire worlds depopulated to feed his throne. A culture built around the worship of pain itself. Those are necessary sacrifices. For what? Valus's voice cracked like a whip. For the survival of humanity. Inquisitor, humanity is dying. Has been dying for millennia. Birth rates in decline across most sectors. Technological regression. Cultural stagnation. The only thing that grows stronger is our capacity for organized suffering. Thorn felt his worldview crumbling around him. You're describing heresy. Blasphemy of the highest order. I'm describing what I have observed during 10,000 years of service at the foot of the Golden Throne. Valor stopped pacing and fixed Thorn with his ancient gaze. Every day I watch 1,000 psychers die to feed him. Every day I feel his presence grow stronger as reports of suffering flow in from across the galaxy. Every day I see him satisfied by news of new atrocities committed in his name. But the Chaos Gods are exactly what they appear to be. Crude embodiments of emotion and desire. They corrupt individuals, transform societies, seek change and growth and evolution. Terrible, yes, but honest in their terrible nature. Valoris's voice grew quieter, more haunted. But the being on the throne, he has convinced an entire species to worship their own damnation, to choose suffering, to embrace oppression as love. Thorn sank into a second chair that hadn't been there moments before, his mind struggling to process the implications. The Morning Star. What is he exactly? Based on our theological analysis? I believe he represents a force that exists to perfect systems of willing subjugation. He doesn't corrupt individuals, he optimizes institutions. He makes oppression more efficient, suffering more meaningful, submission more complete. And the Emperor accepts this? The Emperor welcomes it. Valoris's voice carried a note of infinite sadness. Because it serves his needs perfectly. More efficient suffering means more psychic energy to consume. More willing submission means less resistance to his rule. More perfect oppression means a more stable food source for his endless hunger. Thorn looked up at the chamber's ceiling, where ancient stars were carved in patterns that hurt to contemplate. So what the Morning Star said was true. The Imperium isn't being corrupted, it's being perfected, made into exactly what it was always meant to be. A machine for converting souls into suffering, and suffering into divine power. Valoris nodded grimly. The most elegant feeding system ever devised. And the beautiful part, from their perspective, is that the food source thanks them for the privilege. Then what do we do? Thorn's voice was barely a whisper. If the Emperor himself is... if this is what he truly desires... That, Inquisitor, is the question that has haunted me for 8 months. Valoris walked to the chamber's far wall, where a single pic screen showed a view of Terra's surface. Do we serve the Emperor as he is, or as we believe he should be? Do we protect humanity from threats, or do we protect humanity from its own protector? Thorn joined him at the screen, watching the endless streams of citizens moving through Terra's streets like blood cells through arteries. There's a third option, which is, we investigate further. We learn everything we can about the Morning Star, about his true nature and purpose. We understand exactly what we're facing before we make any decisions. Valoris turned to study the Inquisitor's profile. And if what we learn confirms our worst fears, if we discover that the Emperor truly has become a god of suffering and the Morning Star is his perfect servant, then we'll face that truth when we come to it. Thorn's voice carried new steel. But until then, we gather information. We build understanding. We prepare. Prepare for what? For the possibility that the greatest heresy in human history isn't the worship of chaos gods, it's the worship of the God Emperor himself. The words hung in the air like an accusation, terrible in their implications. But neither man took them back, because they both knew, with growing certainty, that they might also be true. There is one more thing, Valoris said quietly. The Morning Star has requested a private audience with you. What? Thorn spun to face the Custodian General. How does he even know about my investigation? He knows because he wants you to investigate. Because your growing understanding serves his purpose. Valoras's expression was grim. He wants you to learn the truth, Inquisitor. He wants you to understand exactly what you've been serving all these years. Why? Because the moment you truly comprehend the nature of the system you've devoted your life to defending, The moment you realize that every heretic you've executed, every cult you've purged, every act of oppression you've enforced was in service to a God who feeds on willing suffering, that moment of realization will be the most exquisite agony he has ever witnessed. Thorn felt something cold settle in his chest. He's not trying to corrupt me. He's trying to enlighten me. And in doing so, he will achieve the perfect corruption, the corruption of understanding, the damnation that comes not from turning away from truth, but from seeing it too clearly. When does he want this audience? Valoris checked a chrono built into his gauntlet. In 1 hour. He's waiting in his office, with tea prepared and documents ready. He says he has much to show you, and he believes you're finally ready to understand. Thorn looked down at his hands, noting that they were shaking slightly. 40 years of faithful service, and now he stood at the threshold of a truth that might destroy everything he believed in. Custodian General, he said finally, if I don't return from this meeting, or if I return changed, what will you do? I will continue to serve the Emperor as best I understand how, Valoris replied. And I will pray to whatever powers might listen that there is still some fragment of the man he once was buried somewhere in the God he has become. And if there isn't, then we will serve anyway. Because service is all we have left, and the alternative, admitting that we have spent our entire existence in willing service to a cosmic horror, is too terrible to contemplate. Thorn nodded slowly, understanding the weight of duty in a universe where duty itself might be the greatest evil. He walked toward the chamber's exit, his steps echoing in the vast space. Inquisitor, Valoris called after him. Whatever you learn in that office, remember this, knowledge is not the same as wisdom. Understanding evil does not require embracing it. I'll remember, Thorn replied. But as he walked through the palace corridors toward his appointment with the Morning Star, he wondered if remembering would be enough to save his soul from the perfect damnation of absolute clarity. Because the most terrible part wasn't the growing certainty that everything he believed was wrong. It was the growing suspicion that everything he believed was exactly right. Inquisitor Marcus Thorn sat across from Lucifer Morningstar in an office that somehow managed to be both humble and magnificent. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, beautiful hardwood constructions that contained what appeared to be every administrative reform implemented across the Imperium in the past 8 months. The air smelled of parchment and ink, the sacred sense of bureaucracy perfected. Tea? Lucifer asked pleasantly, gesturing to a service set that would have been at home in any mid-level administrator's office. I find that difficult conversations go better with proper refreshment. Thorn accepted the cup, noting its simple ceramic construction. Nothing about this meeting felt like a confrontation with cosmic evil. It felt like a performance review. You've been investigating me, Lucifer continued, consulting a folder thick with reports. 47 separate inquiries across 17 sectors. Interviews with former cultists, analysis of administrative efficiency improvements, theological consultations with learned scholars, quite thorough work. It's my duty. Anyway, it's serving with perfect clarity about what you serve. It's embracing your role as a guardian of willing damnation because you understand that willing damnation is the highest form of order possible. Thorn looked around the office, seeing it clearly for the first time. Not the lair of some cosmic evil, but the administrative center of perfect bureaucracy. The place where oppression was refined, suffering optimized, submission systematized. The Emperor truly is God, he said finally. Yes, a God who hungers for souls and has convinced those souls that being devoured is the highest honor they can achieve. A God who has built the perfect machine for converting hope into despair, freedom into slavery, love into possession. Lucifer's smile was beautiful and terrible. And you, Marcus Thorn, are one of his most perfect servants. What happens now? Now? Now you return to your duties, with complete understanding. You continue to hunt heretics, knowing that you're not protecting humanity from corruption, but protecting the system that corrupts humanity. You continue to serve the Emperor, knowing that he is exactly the kind of God that would build such a system. You continue to enforce imperial law, knowing that every law you enforce tightens the chains that citizens have learned to call halos. Lucifer stood and walked to the window, gazing out at Terra's sprawling masses. And in doing so, you will become the most efficient inquisitor in the history of your order. Because you will no longer waste time on doubt, on questions of morality, on concerns about the righteousness of your actions. You will serve with the perfect clarity that comes from absolute understanding. And if I refuse? If I can't accept this? Then you'll do what you've always done when faced with unacceptable truth. You'll find ways to make it acceptable. You'll construct new justifications, new interpretations, new reasons why the system you serve isn't what it appears to be. Lucifer turned back to him, his expression infinitely patient. Because the alternative, admitting that you've devoted your entire existence to serving a cosmic horror, is too terrible for your mind to process. Thorn stood slowly, his armor feeling heavier than it had in decades. Will I see you again? Oh, my dear Marcus, you'll see me everywhere. In every administrative denial that brings a citizen to tears of gratitude. In every bureaucratic process that transforms hope into despair. In every act of willing submission performed in the Emperor's name. Lucifer's smile was radiant. I am not a being you meet with. I am the principle that underlies every moment of your service. As Thorn walked toward the door, Lucifer called after him, Remember, Marcus, you are not a victim of this system. You are its masterpiece. A soul so perfectly conditioned that even when you see the truth clearly, you choose to serve anyway. There is no corruption more complete, no damnation more perfect than the damnation of absolute understanding. Thorn paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Is there any hope? Any possibility of redemption? Hope for what? Redemption from what? Lucifer's voice was genuinely puzzled. Marcus, you are redeemed. You have been perfected. You serve exactly as you were meant to serve, with complete understanding of what you serve. What greater salvation could there be than perfect clarity of purpose? But the suffering is sacred. The oppression is divine. The chains are halos, and the halos are chains, and the souls who wear them do so willingly, because they have been convinced that slavery is freedom, that pain is love, that damnation is salvation. Lucifer's final words followed Thorn into the corridor. You are not trapped in this system, Marcus. You are the system, and the system is perfect. As the door closed behind him, Inquisitor Marcus Thorn stood alone in the palace corridor, processing the weight of absolute truth. Around him, Terra pulsed with the rhythm of 10 billion souls, choosing their chains, embracing their suffering, sanctifying their submission. He could walk away. He could abandon his post, his duty, his life of service. He could try to forget what he had learned, try to construct new lies to replace the comfortable ones that had been stripped away. Or he could return to his duties with perfect understanding. He could continue hunting heretics, knowing he was protecting the system from those who refused to embrace willing damnation. He could continue serving the Emperor, knowing that the Emperor was exactly the kind of God who would demand such service. He could continue enforcing imperial law, knowing that every law he enforced was another strand in the web of beautiful, voluntary bondage that held humanity in perfect submission. Marcus Thorn, Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus, servant of the Golden Throne, guardian of humanity's willing chains, walked back toward his duties. Because duty was all that remained when truth became too terrible to bear and too perfect to abandon. Behind him, through the office window, Lucifer Morningstar watched Terra's endless cycles of willing suffering with the satisfaction of work well done. Every soul that chose submission over freedom, every citizen that called oppression love, every parent that offered their children as sacrifice, all of it was perfect. All of it was willing. All of it was exactly as it should be. The Imperium would continue. Citizens would continue to suffer gracefully. The Emperor would continue to consume souls, while being praised for his mercy. And servants like Marcus Thorn would continue to protect the system with full knowledge of what they protected, because the alternative, admitting that 40,000 years of human civilization had been built on a foundation of willing damnation, was simply too much truth for any soul to bear. In the end, that was the most beautiful corruption of all, not turning souls away from good, but showing them that what they had always called good was actually perfect evil, and watching them choose to serve it anyway. Because service, once it became complete, was indistinguishable from worship. And worship, once it became absolute, was indistinguishable from damnation. And damnation, once it became willing, was indistinguishable from salvation. The chains were halos. The halos were chains. And the souls who wore them called them beautiful, and meant it, and were right to mean it, because they had been made perfect in their willing imperfection. Lucifer smiled, adjusted his tie, and returned to his paperwork. There was always more work to be done in paradise.